Greetings to everyone that is tuning in for this week's episode of Teacher Talks. It has been 10 weeks since we had an episode like this, so I'm sure some of you might not seen the 10th or 20th episode, but I made a commitment that every 10 episodes I would get on and just sort of open the conversation to anyone that wants to participate. I have a sort of at least loose theme or topic that I want to explore, but I really want to encourage everybody that is watching to please post comments or questions, things that you're curious about that you'd like to discuss, and then I will entertain those during the live stream. So instead of having a prescribed guest and topic for us to talk about, I'll just start sort of musing on something that I've been thinking about lately in the fields of music and education, and I strongly encourage your participation. Every 10 episodes, I want to hear from you. I'd love to know what you're thinking and what your thoughts are about, like I said, music and education or the arts in general, what's going on in your lives, and I'd love the chance to be able to talk about that with you. So I'll be monitoring those comments during the live feed, and again, strongly encourage you to participate as you feel comfortable. For those of you that might be watching for the first time, Teacher Talks was sort of an experiment that I started 30 weeks ago, which I cannot believe it's been that long. But when our university was responding to the pandemic that started its outbreak in King County, where I live in Seattle, Washington, university shut down appropriately, and I wanted to find a way to stay connected with my students. I wanted a chance to continue dialogue that we were having on music and education. So I started these weekly Teacher Talks, and they have continued for 30 weeks. What I thought would just be an experiment in the spring quarter has lasted throughout the summer and into the fall, and I have loved the opportunity to connect with others about arts education initiatives, the transformative power of the arts in our lives. And so we are continuing this journey in our 30th week. SPU, the university I have the privilege of serving at as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities, it's a Christian institution. And so those of you that have watched previous episodes know that I'd like to take a brief moment for prayer and reflection. Whatever prayer means to you, I want to welcome you to this moment to just be grateful and be thankful for the opportunities that we have to connect through technology and social media. And so join me. Again, however you practice prayer, I'd love to just take this moment to be thankful. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for a Sabbath day where we can rest. We thank you for the resources that we have to stay connected as we continue to practice physical distancing to protect our physical health. I pray that you connect us emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually, and that you reduce the space that has been created to divide us, Lord, and that you bring us together. We thank you for this opportunity to connect through this Teacher Talk. I pray that the words that I have inspire others to continue and or create and generate new conversations about the arts and education and how they benefit us. Thank you for the gift of the arts. Thank you for the blessing of the educators that are in our lives that continue to teach us and to continue to learn with us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So to everyone that is watching, again, I would love to know what you're thinking about, what's going on in your own lives. For me, I wanted to start the conversation today with a very powerful question, and that question is, what are we afraid of? I know that that's painfully vague, but I wanted to mention this because of a series of conversations I've had with some of my students and colleagues over the past month in particular. We have been discussing the challenges that we're facing in public schools in particular, the challenges that we're facing because of mandates that we're receiving from the national and state level of returning to school and not returning to school, and what we can and cannot accomplish in the music classroom or the arts classroom. We are seeing, which is honestly terrifying, a lot of arts programs and educators being furloughed throughout the state of Washington and elsewhere in the country because of the limitations that are happening in the classroom and how we can engage students in either face-to-face or online learning. And I have recognized, and I always like to approach this statement carefully, I have recognized that there is an incredible opportunity, right now to reimagine what we're doing in the classroom. And although the pandemic and the COVID-19 virus, as well as the social justice issues that we are being confronted with right now, have done a lot of damage and a lot of harm, without sounding hopelessly optimistic, I'm trying to see some of the potential benefits. And I recognize that the challenges that we're facing have forced us to reimagine what we do and how we do it, particularly in the music classroom, but just broadly speaking. I think we are being forced to reimagine what music education looks like, what teacher preparation looks like, what engagement looks like, what assessment looks like. And I want to encourage myself and others to celebrate that, to celebrate an opportunity where the traditions and the norms, if you will, if we want to use that word, of what our classroom looks like, don't exist. We cannot do things the way that we've always done them. And I think there's an opportunity to really celebrate that by trying new things, by being inventive, by looking for new opportunities for engagement and making music and making art. That can be really intimidating, and it is legitimately scary because we don't know what tomorrow looks like. We don't know what the assessment is going to look like because we haven't done it before. We can't guarantee success because there isn't a precedent for it. But in that experimentation, in that reimagining, we're creating these new spaces for engagement that hasn't existed before. We're reaching students that we've never reached before. We are connecting with students in ways that we've never connected with them before. And we are losing people on the margins. This isn't a guarantee. I know that 100% success is never possible. And I can see that a lot of people are getting frustrated with what they're trying and then not getting the student engagement that they want, or not getting the opportunities fulfilled that they are seeking. And I think that's important. We have to learn from those specific situations. We have to look at them and be discerning about what it is that we tried and what we believe was effective and worked or didn't work. So it's in no way to suggest that that is easy. It is in no way to suggest that that is something that we should just relish in, that we're trying all these new things and that some students are getting it and some students are not. I think we need to hold fast to the idea that we want every student to be engaged in the arts and public schools. We want every student to feel valued in our music classrooms, whether it's online or in person. So I don't want it to diminish the significance of those conversations and the struggle that we're having. But with that said, with that as a preface, I want to ask the question, what are we afraid of? What is prohibiting us from leaning hard into this opportunity to reimagine our classroom? What is it that is keeping us from doing something that we've never done before, for using that online platform, for trying that virtual ensemble, for programming that music? What is it that is stopping us from doing that? And that is a challenging question, and one that sheds light on a lot of systemic issues in teacher preparation programs and undergraduate education for music majors, for the industry of music and what that looks like, and how we engage with popular music and stigmatize other forms of music. It's a huge loaded question that I wouldn't dare suggest is going to be answered, nor are problems going to be solved in the 50 minutes that I talk online for Teacher Talks. But I sincerely hope that we can raise some questions and have some dialogue around what we're afraid of and find ways to navigate those fears so that ultimately we benefit from the process of trying new things and looking at new ways of engaging people in the arts, particularly in public schools. I'm so grateful for those of you that are watching, and those of you that have posted questions. Hello to Lisa. It's good to see a question from you. And I see you bring up program survival. Spent years building my program and COVID killed that momentum. I know I can rebuild, but I'm really hoping that the students I have will hang in there with me during this time. Absolutely. And it's interesting. One of the things I found interesting is that when we're talking about retention, because this is something that I've already experienced. I've only been at SPU for a year. So I'm in my second year. And some of you might have seen in the Seattle Times this morning, there was an article about how COVID has affected college enrollment. So every university, I think, is struggling with that. Not just in Seattle, not just in Washington, I mean, all over the country. But I've been anxious because in my first year, I was able to institute some new things and some changes to the program. And I have been trying to navigate, as I'm sure a lot of people are people leaving because of COVID? Are people leaving because of the changes that I'm making in response to COVID? For those of you that are in new positions or first year teachers, are people leaving because of me, because of choices I'm making, or because I'm new? These are all completely valid questions, important questions we have to ask ourselves. But, and it's not even a but, it's and, I should say and, it's not a but. And I want to add the question, are people leaving because they're not getting what they assumed they would have received from your program? And what is that thing? So Lisa, sort of directed towards your comment, and again, I hope that everybody can appreciate that's listening. I'm not providing solutions for problems. I'm just sort of addressing some of these larger concepts. And I think you bring up a really good one in that our students leaving the program because of COVID, because of the lack of face-to-face instruction, because of the lack of concerts and programs and traditions that we're able to uphold, or are they leaving because they never really had an interest in music? And I think that's something that we should ask, and that we should, again, lean into. It's a conversation that needs to be had. I can say firsthand that when I was teaching high school, a large percentage of my students were not in orchestra because they had this just innate desire to play their instrument. I can say that because they told me that. This is not me making assumptions. I had several students that would openly admit to me, like, I enjoy my instrument, I enjoy making music, but the things that the orchestra is providing me, the social opportunities, the emotional support and engagement, the community that's being built around this ensemble and this sort of public school experience of making music with their peers, that is why they were staying. If their instrument changed, if they didn't have the opportunity to make music, they had articulated to me, I would miss more the people and the opportunities for engagement that orchestra has given me than I would my instrument. And I took it as one of my greatest challenges as a public school educator, and even to this day, the challenge of trying to engage students with the joy of making music and making sure that they understand the fulfillment that you get out of my program should not rest in me. You should not be an orchestra for Mr. Hanson. You shouldn't stay involved in this ensemble because of me, because our time is not promised. I can't promise tomorrow. I don't know what it's going to look like. And ultimately, I made the decision to transition out of my role as a high school music educator to now a higher education music educator and a teacher of teachers. So literally, those students that I worked with, I don't work with them anymore. And I hope that they stayed involved in orchestra because of all of the benefits that they received. But a part of that was the joy that they got from making music. And I really struggled with this. I thought for a while that I wasn't doing my job correctly because my students weren't just completely infatuated with playing their instrument. And that was the reason that they stayed. It absolutely fed my ego to a certain extent. But I also felt sort of guilty that I had become this figurehead. I had become this persona or this thing that students were gravitating towards. And that if and when I decided to leave, that somehow I would do damage to their music education and musical experience. And I can admit at this point in my career that I did stay in my position longer than I probably should have for my own health, because I was concerned about the effects of my students, about what my leaving would look like for them and how that would affect them. And I know so many colleagues that have struggled with that, whether they're transitioning from elementary school to middle school, or from middle school to high school position, or from high school to higher ed, or if they're just changing campuses. Maybe they're staying in middle school, but they're moving to a new campus. I know so many educators that will put themselves in vulnerable and unhealthy positions for their students. And I have learned now, I would not have had this perspective 3 years ago when I was in the midst of, my own personal and professional challenges, that ultimately is not what is best, because your students see what you're struggling with, and your students see the damage that is being inflicted upon you professionally and personally. And it was very interesting. I remember particularly 2 years before I was going to leave, I had a group of student leaders. I'll never forget this, a group of my student officers in our high school orchestra program that had staged this sort of like intervention. And at first I was taken back by it, but now I realize how sincere and really endearing it was. But they all kind of sat down with me, called this special meeting, and looked at me, and they were like, "Mr. Hanson, we're concerned about you." And I'm like, "What?" And we can see how stressed out you are. We can see how frustrated you're getting, and we want to know how we can help. And I kind of blew it off at first because I was like, "What do you get? This is ridiculous. Go practice." I kind of blew them off, but in retrospect, in that year, and especially now looking back on it, I realized how poor a job I was doing of concealing, the things that I was dealing with. Our students are so much more intuitive than I think we give them credit for, and they know when you're struggling, and they know when you're frustrated. And I assumed I had put all of that off or had been hiding it, and I wasn't. And so then I had to make the appropriate changes that would allow me to be healthier and ultimately allow my students to appreciate the time we had together and not just be consumed with what I was going through and what I was dealing with. So it's difficult. So I'm saying all of that to share some of my own experiences, but to say it's difficult. I don't think that there's one answer, but is it the non-musical things that bring our students into our classroom that we should be nurturing? Or should we only be focused on the musical? And when we go into this, this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we see students leaving our program, do we need to adjust to provide some of those social emotional learning opportunities for them, some of that community for them when we don't have face-to-face instruction? Should that be our focus? Should we be leaning into, okay, us creating a virtual ensemble or creating music is less significant right now than retaining you in my program and giving you whatever it is that you were looking for? Or do we understand that that student is making a conscious decision to walk away from the program and we're going to focus on these initiatives that we've created? Again, I don't have the answer. I have things that I've tried on my own, but I'm speaking from a higher ed perspective, which is very different than K through 12 in so many ways, and very similar in that I am very concerned about retention. I'm very concerned about recruitment and what it is that I'm offering and if it's worthwhile. Again, I don't mean to frustrate anyone by complicating the conversation with what probably seems like me being non-discerning or inconsiderate of certain perspectives. It's really just me navigating these things on my own and trying to figure out what works. Pause. Oh, it's too loud. Graham, you got to turn it down. Turn it down, bud. This is how you know it's live. This is how you know it's real. Broadcasting from home with a 3-year-old that knows how to work the remote. So, Lisa, let me jump in. Thank you. Lisa's made a couple other comments. For those that might not be able to see it, if you're looking on YouTube, these are comments getting posted on Facebook. You're able to post comments on Facebook and on YouTube while we're doing the live stream. But let me dive into this. Thank you. So, what is hard is that the social aspect of music is gone right now, and I can't or aren't sure how to replace that. I'm missing it in my own life as well. So I understand how some of my students don't want to be an online orchestra. Absolutely. It does weed out, in quotes, the less serious students, but it has also discouraged some kids who want concerts, the ensemble experience from plugging in this year. They miss the community. So that's hard. Absolutely. That being said, I'm committed to teaching who I have and making it as fun as possible. I have a great group of students this year, which is positive. Also, my beginning classes are awesome. They are so excited to play, and that motivates me. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing this. And I have heard that from multiple colleagues across the state, which I think we can all agree to sort of breathe a collective sigh of relief, that I've heard that beginners are just fully engaged and so excited that the online platforms have created sort of this delay. There's been a delay in getting instruments out and a delay in sort of getting setups and trying to navigate that online. And to one colleague, I know they mentioned it took them like 15 minutes to try to explain how to tune online because the students need to tune their instruments. But that delay has created this anticipation for so many of the beginners. And I for one, was a part of a large group of people. I have the privilege of serving as a curriculum officer for the Washington Music Educators Association. And I was hearing those concerns from colleagues all over the state, particularly in orchestra, but this also affects band and choir, that those beginning students, how are you engaging them and keeping them involved and making sure that they get to a place that they're going to have success in the following years and that they're not going to quote unquote be behind. But I've heard consistently from people that beginners have been incredibly engaged and excited. So I'm so glad to hear that you're experiencing that as well. A couple of things that you're pointing out, again, I don't have the solution, but I think continuing to ask these questions about what does engagement really look like? Why are students leaving and why are they not? If you haven't had the opportunity to reach out to some of those students that are not enrolling or not returning, I'd strongly advise it, doing sort of an anonymous survey through SurveyMonkey, and it should be free because you can do a very simple survey, but you can also do it through the Google Suite, do a Google poll. That kind of feedback is invaluable. I learned very quickly at the end of each of my quarter, as enrollment will sort of fluctuate. For people that don't know, Seattle Pacific University is a private liberal arts school, and so we really encourage engagement in the arts from all disciplines. So you don't have to be a music major to be in a music ensemble. So the ensemble that I work with, from my own perspective, really reminds me of my high school ensemble. Of course, we have that small percentage of kids that are really passionate about music, know that they want to go on after high school and study music, but the vast majority of our students are in orchestra for the very reasons that Lisa's articulating and that we're talking about, that they want the social emotional learning aspects. They want that community that's being built. They just want to be engaged in something that has extracurricular opportunities. So we see the diversity in our populations when we're teaching in public school. And depending on the university that you teach at, you lose some of that diversity. A lot of the times you end up with an ensemble that's primarily music majors. So these are kids that are really engaged with music. They have career aspirations in this field. I feel fortunate that I don't necessarily have that. And that might seem counterintuitive to being a professor in music, but I love the parallel of what I'm experiencing in higher ed that I thought I would lose from teaching in public school, where the diversity of my students' interests, I have nursing students and business majors and creative writing majors and elementary education majors. I have all of these students that have career aspirations that are outside of music. And my challenge is to engage them in music making that satisfies these music majors that have career aspirations in music, but also satisfies what I identify as this intrinsic need to play their instrument and make music. They've expressed that passion and continue to seek music making opportunities after they've left high school, which is absolutely credit that is due to their high school educators that encouraged and nurtured that desire that they have. So I love that I get to work with an ensemble like that. But all of that being said, to Lisa's point, I'm concerned about why are they leaving? I have lost students. Last year in the fall, I had roughly about 30 string students that had registered or were participating in orchestra. They don't have to register to be a part of the ensemble. They could just do it as an extracurricular activity. But we encourage the students to be registered for the course. So I had about 30 string players. Going into this year, and we've been beating the bushes, I have around 16 students that are actively participating. And I am in a fortunate situation that we have a hybrid model. So I do meet with about 11 or 12 students that are on campus, either living on the dorms or living close to campus, and come for some face-to-face instruction. Usually it's a lot of our science majors, the hard science majors or nursing majors, because they have labs that are being done in person, even though most of their classes are online. So they're able to be on campus. So we are providing a platform, practicing social distancing expectations, where we meet face-to-face once a week. Once a week, we're 6 feet apart. We're able to make music. It's only strings right now because of the aerosol studies and limitations as that's put on full symphony orchestra and doing collaborative works with the choir. So it does look very different than what we've done in the past, but we have that group that's meeting. And then while we're doing that, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that video that was posted, I want to say out of South Carolina, of the orchestra director that has students socially distanced in the room, and then he's broadcasting students that are connected through Zoom and they're just muted, but they're playing along with the live ensemble. So absolutely stole that idea. So we're doing something similar. Got students that are in front of me face to face, and then I project on the wall the students that are joining through Zoom to try to bring their presence into the room. I realized that I could just have them on Zoom and just provide a live sound feed and have them engage that way, but I wanted their peers to be able to see them. So I'm projecting them up on the wall. I have about 5 students that engage that way, some of whom kind of go back and forth. Sometimes when they're on campus, they'll join us on campus, or they'll just be on Zoom. But most of them are registered for the course. I have about 3 or 4 students that are not registered and just participating when they're able. And we are doing the virtual ensemble experience. So students are submitting recordings and we're creating an ensemble virtually. Even though we have the in-person instruction, it is I'm trying to find like the PC way of putting a unique orchestration, if you will. So I have like, well, one first violin, two second violins, one viola, six cellos, and three basses. So it's a really wild consort of instruments that are available to meet face to face. I don't think that insinuates anything of cellists that they're meeting face to face. I've kind of pondered that, like, why are the low strings so eager? Is there something to do with them having bigger instruments or something? They want to be in the room making music. I don't know what that means. So I don't know that there's any rhyme or reason. I don't know if there's any logic to it. But that's what I have, what I'm able to work with. And anyway, I brought all of that up to say those numbers are different. I've lost almost 50% of the engagement that I had from students from last year. So what is that? Is it just the pandemic? Is it the requirements of a virtual ensemble, which some students have articulated it was, that they felt a little overwhelmed trying to record themselves and they didn't like recording themselves in isolation. It wasn't the orchestra, the experience that Lisa's pointing out, having that orchestra experience, that community. They didn't like just doing stuff online, which I respect. And they have told me, I want to come back when we're back to a more traditional model, which I respect. It's their choice, and I want them to feel fulfilled. I want them to feel like they're enjoying their experience and not have this chore of recording for the orchestra. So I think some of it can definitely be attributed based off the student feedback that I've received. Some it can be attributed to the students just not feeling engaged or not liking the online orchestra experience. But other things have come up. So I've sent out this survey and asked my students how they're feeling and what they think and why they're not returning, and presented alternative opportunities to say, like, here are some other options that you might have if you want to just come to our once a week rehearsal. If you just want to participate in one piece, where we have a pretty lofty goal. We have 3 different pieces that we're working on right now. Anyone that's done the virtual ensemble experience, that's a lot of stuff to accomplish in a 10-week quarter. Last quarter, we were able to start our spring quarter in the midst of the pandemic, and I had programmed like 4 different pieces for us to do. We ended up doing 1. We recorded 2, and we only produced 1 because it was a huge momentous task to organize that. So I've definitely scaled back my expectations based off my experience of doing virtual ensembles, and understood the challenges of navigating technology and submitting recordings and doing the editing. So I've changed a lot of how I do orchestra with the virtual component. But students did give feedback that they enjoyed that, but it wasn't the same, and that it created a ton of extra work for them. So they just didn't have time for it. They didn't have time for orchestra in general. They were getting into upper division courses, and it was limiting what time they had to make music. And I tried to make peace with that and encourage them to find other ways to engage with music. If they could create a little jam session or find a quartet, or if they could make music at their church, trying to perpetuate what I'm sure their directors imparted on them, that when you leave high school, you don't have to stop making music, and you don't have to be a music major to make music in college. So we were, having these conversations in this dialogue. So if you haven't done that, reach out to some of the students that aren't returning or are doing schedule changes. And it doesn't have to be accusatory. There doesn't have to be any judgment in it, but just ask them, have you found another way to keep making music? And if not, let me provide some suggestions. Here are some great ways that you can do it, whether you're just jamming online with some backing tracks, or if you're working with a community music ensemble or taking private lessons, or, especially if you had a long-term member that maybe has been in your program for 2 or 3 years, or if you teach middle school and high school. I did that for 3 years. And you get to see those students mature from 6th grade through 12th grade, and maybe some of your 8th graders haven't continued. Reaching out to those students and getting their feedback, I think, can be really valuable. And I think this is actually a really good transition to return to where we started and asking this question: what are you afraid of? One of the things that I am realizing, and I'm trying to navigate very quickly, as every day there seems to be new variables for us to navigate. Do I have to do orchestra, as it were? Do I have to fulfill my roles and responsibilities as an ensemble director in this traditional way, in the way that I've always experienced it? Are there not other ways that I could create music? The virtual ensemble has given me an opportunity to experiment with that. I've never participated in a virtual ensemble until now. I've never tried to create one of those until now. So It's interesting to me to be trying some new things and learning as an ensemble director, but not necessarily as a musician participating in these ensembles. But could I push it even further? Could I create a completely alternative ensemble that doesn't rely on a first and second violin section, viola, cello, and bass? Could I just create a string ensemble that explores world musics, that explores music that maybe is not traditionally written for the string ensemble? Could I create some sort of rock ensemble? Could I create some sort of, and it literally, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff and imagining in my own mind, could I create some sort of a Latinx ensemble? Maybe we could have an all-string salsa band. Is that possible? Could I look at non-traditional ways of playing the instruments? Do I have to adhere to what I have inherited, what we have all arguably inherited as orchestra directors or just as music educators in general, which is a predominantly Western European art music model? The wind ensemble, the string orchestra, the choir, does it have to look like that? This is not, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear about that. This is not me suggesting that we villainize traditions or that we criticize Western European art music to buy into the rhetoric of questioning systemic racism and oppression. I think that we need to look critically at the systems in which we educate and we engage in music. I think that there is inherent bias and prejudice within the classical music industry and within the systems of music education that we have been practicing as long as we have. I believe that's my personal conviction based off of my personal experiences. I think that we have to look critically at the systems of education and engagement of music that we have in America and across the world, because there is inherent prejudice and bias. I believe that. Now, that being said, I do not think that that means that we should stop performing in string orchestras or symphony orchestras, that we completely ignore the incredible canon of work that comes from Western European art music, or that somehow music written by white European composers of the 18th and 19th century is inherently prejudiced or biased or racist. I know that not to be true because there are too many composers of color or composers that were marginalized in their own time that were using this platform of the Western European orchestra to create incredible music that had incredible messages, or incredible music that was just great music. Music, non-program music, absolute music that was just gorgeous and beautiful and was exploiting the opportunities that Western European theory and Western European art music provides us. What I think is significant is that is one way of making music. It's not the way of making music. That's one way of recognizing what the orchestra is capable of. It's not the only way to recognize what the orchestra is capable of. I've always appreciated colleagues that view the orchestra as an ensemble that utilizes European instruments rather than this very structured, strict model of an ensemble that is then limited to very particular repertoire. I know people that talk about their orchestra in broad terms, that it's just a collection of people making music together, that really appreciate the etymology of that word, of just bringing others together to make music in consort with each other. I think that now more than ever is a really important thing to ask ourselves. What does our ensemble look like, and why does it look that way? What are the other iterations of the orchestra or wind ensemble or choir that we could experiment with? How could we embrace others getting involved with our ensembles in quote unquote non-traditional ways? I've always sort of shuddered from that, the idea of alternative styles and sort of promoting the hegemony of one way of looking at Western art music. Although it makes sense logically because Western art music is a very particular platform with a particular structure, why has that become the gold standard? Why has that become the only way that we view looking at music? And one of the courses that I'm teaching this quarter, we have the opportunity to look at alternative standards, alternative styles, alternative approaches to making music with others, particularly in the public school system. And I love what this course has challenged me to do, because I experimented with some of these models and not all of them stuck. Not all of them were meant for the community that I was teaching. So when we tried them and it didn't work, we moved on to something else. I did have a rock group at my high school that existed for about a year and a half. And then eventually the interest sort of waned on it. And so we didn't do it anymore, but we loved doing it while we had it. My orchestra in my high school performed at our homecoming pep rally every year. It's one of the highlights of our year. And we performed pop music, and we used backing tracks and played with percussion and drummers, and has sort of explored that non-traditional model for strings and making pop and rock music. And we loved that. And that was a tradition that we kept for many years that I was there. I think we ended up doing it for 6 or 7 years in a row. So that was something that we did, and it was great, and we tried it, and the students enjoyed it, and it was good for the community, so we kept that model. And that being said, I also participated in the Texas Renaissance Festival Early Music Contest, and we would start every year studying Renaissance and Baroque music. And so it was very focused. It was a narrow scope of what, string instruments are capable of. We focused in specifically on the 17th and 16th century and really wanted to explore early music on string instruments. But the students loved it. And we had this great festival that we got to go participate in. And we learned about the Renaissance and talked about the social and cultural significance of the music that was being written then. And it was wonderful. So again, I want to reiterate that this is not about villainizing one form of music or saying that one form of music is better than the other, but sort of leaning into that question. What are we afraid of? Why can you not deviate from the quote unquote standard? If we look at the Washington Music Educator Standards, or if we look at even the National Core Arts Standards that exist for music educators and instrumental music educators, it doesn't dictate orchestration to us. It would be incredibly irresponsible to do so, because all of our programs look different. Not all programs are created equal. I can tell you, before I left my position as a high school educator, I had this surge of violas. I don't know what was in the water, but I had just an insane number of students that were starting in middle school on viola, staying on the instrument. We had huge viola sections in my orchestra. It was fantastic. I know that a lot of my colleagues can agree. Having too many violas is a good problem to have. I spent years needing violas, and I don't know that we did anything in particular to recruit them, but suddenly we had all these violas, and it was great. It was wonderful to have. So I mentioned that to say, to assume that all programs are going to have the equitable number of violins, violas, and cellos and basses that they need. I remember one year my sub-non-varsity orchestra had no bass. It was really frustrating. There was just no bass in that ensemble one year. So I think it's good for us to recognize the fact that our standards are not published with a particular orchestration. I think that's a good thing. The standards don't tell you that you have to present music, first and second violins, viola, cello, and bass, right? Or that you have to have every woodwind and brass instrument present to call it a wind ensemble. I know my band colleagues, with the huge variety of instruments that they have to engage with, know that firsthand. How many of us are short of double reed players at the secondary level? I mean, it happens all the time. That amazing oboe player moves or graduates, and then we're short our oboe player. Or we don't have anyone that wants to learn bassoon one year, and once they graduate, we're without bassoon. So I think it's important for us to know that there isn't a prescribed ensemble within the standards. It just talks about engaging students with instrumental music in a lot of unique ways. Similarly, I love the transition that I've seen across the country to de-gender a lot of our choirs, that we don't have to have the boys choir and the girls choir. We can have choirs. We can have treble bass choirs. We can demystify the idea that the voice must be gendered in a specific way and lean into the idea that we're just singing, and that we can group people's voices in ways that allow us to explore certain repertoire. So I love that idea. So again, what are we afraid of? Why can we not do that? Why can we not completely reimagine our orchestra? Can we still perform music that adheres to a Western European art canon? Absolutely. I don't think we should get rid of it. But does it have to be the only thing that we do? And what is it that we're afraid of? Are we afraid that we can no longer go to the festivals and contests that we went to because they have prescribed only certain music is allowed? Why are we participating in something that's so narrow-minded? Why would we want to inflict our students into a system that says some music isn't good enough or literally some music is not allowed. Why think so in such limitations? Are we afraid that our colleagues are going to judge us or think less of us because we don't have the traditional ensemble or don't participate in these activities? Well, I mean, without sounding dismissive, your colleagues don't teach where you teach. I think that it's important for us to enter dialogue with our colleagues and peers because I think we can learn through that to think critically about what we're doing and find out what others are doing. But I would get really frustrated when I would hear my colleagues putting each other down or casting judgment on a programming choice or a decision that was made in another program when they don't teach at that school. Unless you're teaching at that campus and you truly can understand and appreciate what the community of students that you serve needs, it's really easy to cast judgment and assume, well, I would never program that or I would never do that. Well, you don't teach at my school. You don't know my students. You don't necessarily know what it is that they need. And I'm struggling to find and articulate what it is that they need. So I'm not going to appreciate sort of a water cooler conversation and judgment, being condemned because I programmed this work or I leaned into this activity or this festival or contest or this trip and saw value in it and saw the promise of what it offered my students. And you couldn't see that in our 10-minute conversation. You can probably hear from the way I'm talking about it, this is something I experienced personally and really struggled with because I always wanted to engage in conversations with my colleagues, and I almost always learned from their experiences and the wisdom they had to offer. But I also didn't appreciate people that would question decisions that I made for my students and my program without having any context, without asking me, oh, why did you choose to do that? But just, oh, I would never play that piece, or I would never go, on that trip, or I never really understood that. The pretension that came with that, I didn't like it, to say the very least. And so again, is that a fear, which is very real? I think we want to be respected and liked by our colleagues. I think that that's valid. But should that keep you from making what could be dubbed radical decisions, which I don't think that we should criminalize people for thinking outside of an established norm to be radical. I think that we should celebrate them for being creative and imaginative and meeting their students' needs when recognizing what those needs are. But are we afraid of that judgment, of peer judgment? Are we afraid of an administration? Are we afraid of our supervisors not being able to appreciate and understand what we're doing? Should that be the reason that we prohibit creativity and imagination in our own classrooms, or that we start to reimagine what our ensembles look like and what ensemble engagement looks like? I've shared on multiple times on multiple platforms. I ran a community orchestra in Central Texas called the SMART Orchestra. It stood for San Marcos Artist Retention and Training Orchestra. We wanted to try to retain people on the instruments that they had explored in high school or college and get them to keep making music and train them to do new things. And one of the greatest gifts I discovered in the repertoire were these flex band ensembles and these flex arrangements where you could just bring a group of people together pretty much on any instrument and they'd have parts available to sort of create an ensemble. I loved it because although I always wanted to be able to explore the quote unquote master works or these great works from the Western European canon, the reality was I often didn't have the instrumentation. I was often missing double reed players. I usually had a shortage of violins, which I think might surprise some people because we assume that that's such a common string instrument for people to be learning. And to have, we have all those friends that have a violin in the back of their closet, right? Someone played and we asked them to dust it off and bring it in and make music with us. But I was usually short some violins, and the level of musicianship was always really wide, and there was a ton of variety of how much people were able to engage in terms of their time commitment. We had lawyers and dentists and postal workers and retired teachers and professional musicians and all kinds of people in this community ensemble. But I loved the idea that there was repertoire that allowed them to perform music, to appreciate the melody and harmony and rhythms of a lot of great works, without having this very strict orchestration and structure. Now, was it the same? No, it was different, but it needed to be different in order for me to be able to engage the community musicians that I was working with. So there was apprehension to a certain extent when I was leading this ensemble to program things that were divergent in terms of the orchestral standard of what orchestra was quote unquote supposed to look like, because I didn't know if people would want to hear that. I didn't know if people would be interested. What I found, though, is that my audience was usually less judgmental and less discerning about the orchestration or the ensemble that was in front of them than they were about those foundational aspects of music that unite all of us: melody, harmony, and rhythm. Fundamental aspects of music that everyone should arguably be able to appreciate. I seldom, if ever, if I try to recollect, I seldom had someone approach me after a concert to say, well, I detested that performance because it was not the original. I hated that you played an arrangement and you didn't play the original work. When the reality was, they appreciated the fact that with these reduced numbers, with this unique orchestration, I was able to bring the melodies of Mahler or Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn or some of these composers that we know and love from the Western European art canon. I was able to bring them into our community, and these musicians were able to share those melodies and harmonies and rhythms in an accessible way with an accessible orchestration. People usually celebrated that. They usually loved it. They also celebrated, this was something that I thought was unique, even though it doesn't give the full story and context of these great works, a lot of the arrangements are shorter. So they were able to appreciate and sort of be enticed by these works that would encourage them to go out and buy a CD or subscribe to an ensemble that was playing the original, because they just sort of got a snippet. I came to realize that a lot of my programs, and I think it's important for us to look at programs this way in public education, but particularly in community music ensembles, became sort of the Reader's Digest version of a lot of great musical works, whether they were from the Western European canon or from film music or from pop music. We weren't doing original works that would sometimes last for 50 to 60 minutes. But what that allowed us to do was to explore a lot of different works in one concert. So we would span multiple symphonies, multiple oratorios, multiple movies, multiple jazz tunes, multiple pieces, because we had these arrangements that were about 3 or 5 minutes each. So within an hour's concert, we were exploring all kinds of music by all kinds of composers, and we're able to encourage people, if you liked what we did, you should hear the original, which that ultimately generated more patronage for the arts. And I think that should be a goal for all of us, is that we want to encourage people to do more rather than less when it comes to patronizing the arts. So there was so much value in it. And I have to be clear that it took me years to get to that place. I can be open and honest about that. I did not establish my community music ensemble, nor did I teach in public schools with such an enlightened view to recognize that the benefits of the decisions that I was making was going to have long-term effects, or that and I don't want to use the word compromising, because again, I think there's too much value placed in that. But by making decisions to use an arrangement or to use a flex orchestration, or to expose my students in particular to works, to arrangements of works that were not the original, I think there was so much value in that. And it took me several years of conducting and teaching with those arrangements, with those works, to say, this was good. And I didn't sacrifice the overall artistic or aesthetic value of what I was doing because I didn't perform an original. The pressure that I think so many of us receive to quote unquote play original works, and what that means, and the status symbol that creates. I've never appreciated that, particularly as an orchestra director or even as a violinist. That's my primary instrument. I think if we could lean more into those foundational aspects of music, melody, harmony, and rhythm, and how significant those are, and the possibilities that open up to explore other repertory. That if we could hear the melody of an Egyptian folk song, if we could listen to the harmonies of Eastern European music, gypsy music and Romanian folk tunes and things like that, if we could appreciate what that means and what that does, if we could talk about the extraordinary rhythms of South Indian music, that could be so much more inviting and create such an open space for making and hearing and listening to music. There is a distinction between hearing and listening music. I think that could be really exciting and really valuable. as opposed to, again, going back to this question, what are we afraid of? As opposed to, well, we can only perform these works because this is what we have to work with. And what I would consider sort of approaching it with this deficit thinking model, that I can only do certain things because of these limitations that I have, rather than, okay, I don't have a bass in this ensemble this year, so my ensemble could now do string quartet repertoire, right? I don't have a bass, but now we can explore this, and I could break these kids up into small groups and do that. And I did that with the ensemble that I referenced earlier. We played a lot of string quartet stuff because my bass players wouldn't be left out because I didn't have a bass player. When I had, especially in my beginning orchestras, we would go through a year where we might be missing a total section. I remember when I first started teaching, we actually had this, drought of violas. I'm not sure why. So I had a lot of students playing a third violin part, and we talked about the significance of what it means to have a third part to contribute to harmony, and how important that is. I see a comment here from Aaron. Thank you. To be careful about the word gypsy as opposed to Roma people. And I specifically was referencing gypsy music. That is a cultural identifier of the music that comes from Eastern Europe, particularly from Romania. And I've had valuable conversation with this. I have a student that is Romanian, and we talked about this for a certain extent. And a good friend that plays gypsy violin, and I took that term from her and the practices that she did. But that is an excellent point, and I'm glad that you bring it up, because we have to be cautious about how we do that. To refer to a person as a gypsy is absolutely a slur. But there is a gypsy culture that exists in music and food and I think cultural practices that come from that, that are worth celebrating and exploring. And definitely, to anyone, if I am using that term incorrectly or if my understanding is flawed, please let me know. Send me a private message or make a comment here. And thank you for Aaron for bringing that up. For people that are unaware, referring to a person as a gypsy is a slur, and we need to be conscious of that and how we use that term. But again, I think this is an excellent illustration of the point. And this was, I believe, unintentional, but thank you for Aaron for making that comment, because this is something that we should be talking about, and we should invite our students to have those types of conversations rather than making assumptions or limiting the exposure of what they're doing in our classroom. I've been talking with one of my classes about the significance of programming and what do we program. And I read this in an article, and I thought it was phrased so well. It asked this question, what are you bringing into your classroom? What are you bringing into your classroom? And the responsibility that we have as educators to diversify the repertoire, to bring lots of opportunities for students to engage with music into the classroom so that they can see it, see music, that is, in these sort of unique and diverse ways. And I recognized all at once, now mind you, and this is after years of teaching, and I think I was cognizant of it, but not necessarily conscious of it when I was doing my programming, that I really became the gatekeeper, that I had this immense responsibility of bringing the music into my classroom because no one else was making those decisions. I was the one programming the music. I was the one purchasing it. So what was I bringing into my classroom? What was I providing for my students? No one else was a part of that conversation. And you might be in a unique situation. You might have associate or assistant directors, or you might be working with a team of people to program on your campus. So it might not be the same for you, but for those of you that are working alone, that you are the person that programs the repertoire for your students. What does that mean? What are you bringing into the classroom? What are you keeping out? And again, back to this original question, what are we afraid of? What is it that is prohibiting us from totally breaking through these barriers of tradition and these models that we've inherited and looking at our ensemble in completely new ways? What does it mean to not have a first and a second violin section for my orchestra colleagues? What does it mean to look at instruments more for their register than their tone and let all of the melody instruments play in a specific line? Right? Everybody gets the melody, not just the flutes, not just the trumpets. Like, what does it mean to open up possibilities for our ensemble and to buy and encourage and patronize organizations and ensembles and repertoire that allows us to do that? Even more so, what does it mean to explore some other genres? What does it mean to bring in world music to the secondary instrumental curriculum in particular? I've always been envious of my choir colleagues that seem to do an extraordinary job because of the wealth of repertoire that exists for the voice that spans all these cultures and continents, and it's amazing to me. Whereas I have seen the limitations of the music I can choose from, of the music that I can program. And I recognize the severity of that for the students that are receiving a music education from me, that what I provide them is what they receive, and they might not be getting an exposure to music anywhere else. I think I'll finish up with the few minutes that we have left with a realization that I had. And this goes back to what I was talking to Lisa about. It was sort of engaging with the students that might leave your program, whether they just graduated or they're changing their schedule or they don't feel comfortable engaging with your ensembles right now during the pandemic, having those conversations with them. And I have offered a poll. I usually do some sort of a survey every quarter with my ensemble. And I just asked them, what did you think about the music we did this quarter? And what did you think about the rehearsal process? And what would you want to change? And I just want their input. I want to know what they think and what they've experienced. So I did this, and I had intentionally made the decision to try to program some diverse works and sort of move the ensemble that I work with away from only Western European art music. I didn't want that to be the only thing that we did. So we were doing a lot of other types of music, and I was surprised to see from the students, who I assumed would be really excited about that, to see in the survey responses they were getting that I really just want to play masterworks. I really want to play Beethoven. I really want to play something by Haydn. Or I was seeing this, and it surprised me because I thought the students would be excited about doing other composers and contemporary works. And what I realized, and it came through a conversation with one of the students, we were talking about it, and I had a good relationship with the student that I could sort of engage in this conversation and talk about the survey results they did. Most of them were anonymous, so I didn't talk to every student. But again, I had a good relationship with the student. I said, hey, I noticed that you wanted to play more Western European art music. And it surprised me because I know that you enjoyed doing some of those other works. And I said, well, yeah, but that's what I know, and that's what I'm most comfortable with. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, when I was in my high school orchestra, that was the only thing that we played. So my exposure to my instrument and my engagement with music has always been driven by Western art music. That's all I know. And you exposed us to new music, and I did like it, but I know my instrument. I was introduced to it, and I have my relationship with my instrument because of Western art music. So when I think of my instrument, I think of that music, and I want to nurture that connection that I have in my own mind and my own experiences. And again, for me, it was this huge realization of the students that I'm getting in higher ed at the college level. They are coming into my classroom with a wealth of experiences, a wealth of musical experiences that I only know when I engage with them in conversation. Likewise, for those of you that are not beginning your students, if you're not dealing with beginner students, they are walking into your classroom with all of these other experiences. And where are they coming from? It's an important question to ask. If the only thing they know of their instrument is one style of music, how can we broaden their perspective and teach them to celebrate what their music or what their instrument is capable of in music, broadly speaking? Again, I want to say that. How can we encourage them to see their music as their instrument, rather, as a tool to engage with music, rather than their instrument focused and monopolized and pigeonholed into this one area, this one repertory? How can we use our classroom to be this laboratory for music, to make all kinds of music and see music from its foundational aspects of melody, rhythm, and harmony, and how we can show them to use their instrument to explore those aspects and variables so that music opens up for them, that they don't have a myopic view, that music becomes this world of opportunity. How could we do that? And why are we afraid to do it? What's keeping us from taking that plunge? Again, I think that the pandemic has done many things. And one thing that has proven to be a benefit is that we are reimagining, we are re-examining what it is that we do in our classroom. What are we afraid of? Let's lean into that. Let's look at new opportunities to make music with our students and give them these opportunities in every class to see themselves as musicians engaged in making music with others, not confined by their instrument or one genre or style of music or one set of composers? How do we open up the world of music to our students? I want to thank you for everybody that made comments and was a part of this conversation today. For those of you that might be watching this archived, thank you for watching this, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook. All of our past episodes are available on YouTube. We've got a playlist set up specifically for Teacher Talks. If you have any questions or comments, if you want to suggest some people that I can speak with, please feel free to send me a message or post on here. I always monitor these comments. Again, thank you for your time. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. It's so amazing to be celebrating 30 episodes, and I look forward to posting more Teacher Talks in the future. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to stay connected with those of you that are interested and want us to explore specific topics. As always, I hope that you are safe. I hope that you're making responsible decisions to keep others safe as we appropriately practice social distancing. I hope you do not distance yourself spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally. Stay connected, keep making music with others, and have an extraordinary year. To all of my fellow educators and students, keep making music and have a great day. We'll see you